It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Let's talk for a minute. We're going to start by talking about Bruce Lee and something that upsets a lot of people that I've talked about on this channel, and I'll tell you why it upsets me to hear their reaction. Bruce Lee had a stunt double. That alone makes a lot of people angry. He had a stunt double, a man named Yuan Hua, who has worked in many Hong Kong films. If you've seen a Hong Kong kung fu movie, you've probably seen this man on screen. Anytime in Bruce Lee's films you see an acrobatic movement, a flip, a high jump, a round off, something like that, it only happened a few times. That's not Bruce, that's Yuan Hua. And for those who believe that Bruce was an invincible, superpowered demigod, this is deeply hurtful to them, because it destroys that worldview that Bruce Lee could do anything. And that overshadows what I believe is a much more important thing that we can learn from Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was an injured man. He had an injury from a stupid weightlifting accident. He was doing a good morning exercise, where you load a barbell onto your back and hinge at the hip and bend over with a straight back in order to develop the posterior chain. And for whatever reason, maybe he didn't warm up properly, maybe he overloaded the bar, he injured his back and it turned out to be a lifelong injury. And so there was a lot physically that Bruce Lee couldn't do. Bruce Lee was born with a birth defect. You are probably familiar, if you're a big Bruce Lee fan, with his signature stance, where he had his right foot in the front, his left foot in the back, and he was heavy on his back foot. And his legs seemed to be bent a little bit. His legs seemed disproportionate because they were. It wasn't just a bend in the knee. His left leg was shorter than his right. We're talking about a physically imperfect person. And I'll tell you why this is so beautiful, and it's not dunking on Bruce Lee, it's not pooping on his legacy, it's expanding upon it. This man who is struggling through essentially physical disabilities rose to prominence in physical culture and made the world pay attention to martial arts and get very interested in physical culture. Think about that for a minute. A man with actual physical disabilities who struggled to perform some very basic things because of what he was physically incapable of doing because of injuries, birth defects, etc. Managed, instead of focusing on what he could not do, focused on what he could do and inspired the world. I think that is a much more interesting and compelling story than an invincible demigod who could do no wrong, who was physically perfect. The first one, that's inspiring. That second, not so much. You ever play a video game on God mode, and it's fun for about 5 minutes, then you're like, there's no challenge. I can't die. I can't lose. And so that fantasy quickly evaporates. And you go back to playing in the regular mode where there's challenge. There's opposition. Because you need that to grow. That's what makes it fun. That's what makes it interesting. That's what makes any story compelling. Challenge. I think one of the hardest things for the public to accept, and one of the greatest human prejudices, if not the greatest, is turning a blind eye to disabilities. My father was an amputee. My grandmother was an amputee also, both missing a hand. My father missing most of his left hand, my grandmother missing most of her right hand. and completely unrelated accidents that led to those disabilities. But neither of them ever described themselves as being disabled, interestingly enough. And I never grew up thinking of my grandmother as disabled or disadvantaged or anything like that. Instead of focusing on what she couldn't do because she's missing her right hand, as a right-handed person, that's a huge disadvantage in life, right? She made do. I had an experience the other day. Somebody posted this video on Instagram. There is a young woman, and I believe I'm not sure if she's an amateur or professional fighter, but she's a fighter. She's had some fights, and technically she knows what she's doing, and she's hitting a bag. Not at a combat sports gym, but it appears to be a weights and treadmills type of gym, but they have a heavy bag hanging up there. She's practicing some Muay Thai techniques on the bag. She looks pretty good. And this young man walks up, and he starts smiling, and I'm not sure what he says because the audio is not there, but he says something to her, which I assume is like, let me show you how it's done, or like this. And then he proceeds to hit the bag, and it's not very good. It's not only not very good, he is incredibly physically uncoordinated, but he insists on coming back to the bag, and most of the comments are like, this guy is a jerk, this guy is the worst, this guy is an example of toxic masculinity. And I'm watching this. I spent years working in special education and working with people with special needs, and I couldn't help but question, as I was watching this, I genuinely could not tell if I was watching somebody with special needs and or a physical disability act out in public in a way that is not socially acceptable, or if he was just an able-bodied man who really was that bad at moving and reading the room, and just bad at social cues. Could be either one in my estimation, so I wrote a comment saying exactly this. I genuinely cannot tell if that guy has special needs and a physical disability or what. And it got a few hundred likes, and some people responded with, ha ha, that's a pretty funny joke. I'm not joking, guys, I'm not joking. But then it also got some more interesting comments here from people accusing me of, what did they call it? Ableism. Throwing out the pejorative term of ableism. Stop being an ableist. And if by being an ableist they mean talking about disabilities publicly instead of sweeping them under the rug where they are hidden, you can't see them, out of sight, out of mind, where we're comfortable, because disabilities make us uncomfortable. They really, really do. If you don't believe that, you're either a saint, which you're probably not, or you're lying to yourself, or you simply haven't had enough life experience yet. So my father lost his hand when he was about 11 or 12. He was fairly young. Got blown up with an explosive. And he had not a prosthetic hand, but like a fake model hand, because prosthetics weren't very advanced back then, that he would put on in public sometimes, not for his benefit, but for the benefit of others, to make other people feel more comfortable, instead of looking at the kid with the weird crippled, missing hand and the gnarly-looking finger pointing out at the stump of it. Because that made people uncomfortable. Oh, that's gross and weird and makes me feel complicated emotions I don't know how to process. And so my dad, he hated this fake hand. He hated carrying this around with him for pictures and in public and going to church and all this. So eventually he just put it away and stuck his hand in his pocket. Stuck what was left of his hand in his pocket, just to keep it out of sight. And so looking through photographs of him growing up, you can see that hand just starts, he's hiding it. He's hiding it out of this sense of shame. Shame from himself? No, shame that's inflicted on him by the public. We don't want to be reminded of your gross disability. Keep it out of sight, is what people keep saying. And these are the types of comments that I was getting from these people accusing me of being ableist, saying, no, we don't claim this guy. We don't claim him. He's not one of us. And I don't believe it was special needs people writing these comments, but everybody has their own unique special needs, right? But when I say special needs, I'm talking about people with severe mental disabilities, for example. So I wrote a reply to one of these ladies, and I was pretty heavy-handed. I was going to let it slide and not say anything because I thought, you know what? You talk about this stuff in a public forum like Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, you can get canceled. And my thought was, you know what, screw it, let's get canceled for the right reasons. For standing up for what's right, for standing up for those who cannot speak for themselves because they're not on this forum. Somebody wrote back and said, special needs people would never act out like this in public. You've never been around them, have you, man? Look, so I wrote this. I've worked in special needs. I've worked in special education with many special needs individuals. I can tell you from experience that no, many individuals with special needs do not understand concepts like acting respectfully, respecting boundaries, social cues, etc., hence their special needs. And of course, another lady lashed back, feeling like she's in the right, standing up for this benevolent idea of we can't talk about disabled people because it's wrong, because it makes us feel icky and gross and reminds us that there's injustice in this world. From the get-go, from the start, that we don't all start on an equal footing. And some of us start rock bottom. And it's rough. And this lady actually deleted her comments after I wrote this, so I won't be able to read what she wrote, but essentially, you'll get the picture. So I responded, forget pejorative labels like ableist. That's downright cruel of you to say, we don't claim him about a man who is potentially struggling with special needs, just because you don't like the way he is manifesting his disorder. This tells me that you would write off the millions of special needs human beings who act out in public in socially unacceptable ways, often much worse than this, because it makes you uncomfortable. If you thought the guy on the heavy bag was unclaimable, you would have turned up your nose at so many of the kids at the Special Olympics if you heard some of the things they said to each other in person. And you definitely would have written off most of the people I've worked with over the years because of the ways they sometimes behave. Whatever you are struggling with personally does not make you president of Disabilities. I am legally blind. Last year, I lost partial use of my legs. Thanks, Ultimate Self-Defense Championship. I'm the son of an amputee, and neither of us ever considered ourselves disabled. After what you said, I do not care who is part of your acceptable disabilities club. You want to rant about what is offensive. Okay, I'm not personally offended by what you said because I have a very thick skin, and I've heard much, much worse toward me. Unfortunately, the people who really should be offended at this ideology you are espousing cannot usually speak for themselves on a forum like this. I hate the idea of disposable human beings. And unfortunately, we live in a society where so many millions of people want to be able to dispose of human beings. And this isn't a new thing. We just changed the terminology. After World War II, and it was still going on in the early 1980s, they called them the feeble-minded. And in the United States, they were forcibly sterilized. And a lot of the American public was totally on board with this. Yeah, let's get rid of these unacceptables, these untouchables. We don't have a caste system in the United States like certain cultures on this planet, except we kind of do. Sweep them under the rug. Forget about them. Out of sight, out of mind. Not cool, America. Oh, but that was in the past. That ended in the 80s. Disposable human beings. And I get it. It's hard. I have worked with special needs individuals, and it's one of the hardest jobs I can think of on this planet. And I did it for just a few years. And man, there was this woman, I don't even remember her name, but she had worked with these special needs individuals most of her adult life, and she was an actual literal saint, in my estimation, who deserves a bright, glorious spot in heaven. As far as I'm concerned, if I was the judge of the quick and the dead, for the work and the patience that she offered and ministered on the part of her fellow man, on the part of the least of these our brethren. And it's hard. And it is a shocking reminder of our own human frailty to see people who cannot do some of the most basic things for themselves. So I worked a few different jobs, both with adults and with children, and with the adults, it was sad, understandable, but very sad, because these people were often shipped away by their families, by their parents. And I understand it. It's hard, and it's clearly a difficult decision to make, but they were essentially disposed of. Somebody else's problem. And that breaks my heart. I mean, I get it, but it breaks my heart. Let's go back to this video for a minute. Let's assume for a moment that this guy in the video has no special needs. Actually, after I wrote this comment, after I wrote this reply, a young man who claimed to know this individual in person chimed in and said, I know this guy. He actually has a severe form of ADHD. Now, is that an excuse to act like a jerk in public? No. But at the same time, it is an important reminder everybody is dealing with a different situation. And to simply judge everybody by the same exact metric, that's kind of a strange thing to do. By the measure that we judge, we shall be measured. My friends, never forget that. So let's just assume he's just some jerk out there in the gym, and he sees this girl, and this is the picture that is painted, and this is what most people are thinking when they watch this. Most people aren't thinking about disabilities or anything like that. Most people didn't go down this mental pathway that I did when I saw this video. And it's just some jerk of a dude seeing a girl work out, looking pretty decent on the heavy bag, And then he just wants to one-up her, like, look at me, I'm better than you, I'm a big, strong man, and you're just a woman. I have a penis, and therefore I'm superior. Or whatever people are thinking here. Has that sort of thing happened before? All the time, I'm certain. Yeah. If you know some women out there, talk to them, ask them about their experiences. I'm sure they've had an experience like that, where some man tried to one-up them. I am a man, and therefore you must kowtow to my expertise. And of course, if you're a man, I'm certain you've also had that experience with a man too. I am a superior man, and therefore you must cow down to my expertise. But, yeah, going from that perspective, she's hitting the bag, she's getting her workout, this guy keeps interrupting the workout, not cool. Yeah, it's socially unacceptable. We can all agree on that. What he did, it's not okay, it's not cool, it's not nice. We're not writing off an excuse for this dude. This is just a segue into a larger conversation about disabilities. Let's go back to that in a minute. There were some other comments that I want to read here. Someone chimes in and says, no need to be ableist. He is a fragile, insecure male. Well, physically he does look fragile. He looks very fragile. So, that's kind of an ableist comment right there for you to make. Like, judging from a physical perspective, this man is physically weak. He is frail. He is fragile. He is not good at kicking. He's very unbalanced. His form is very wonky. He clearly hasn't trained, at least not for very long. He appears to be overconfident, very overconfident. Is he insecure? That's an interesting phrase you chose there. He seems to be very secure about his own abilities. Obviously, he's overestimating them grossly. The insecurity here, however, perhaps he feels challenged in a way, thinking, oh, there's this young woman doing this thing that I think I'm good at. Look, I've got a pair of boxing gloves on. I'm ready for this. I suppose so. Let's read another comment. Certain cultures are even more toxic than most regarding women in fitness and fighting. That's as much as I will say here, LOL, says another commenter. Well, sure, man, yeah, certain cultures definitely have a certain machismo to them. Certain cultures don't allow women to drive or get an education or all kinds of other things. Certain cultures are certainly different than certain other cultures. Here's one more comment. This comment comes across as looking for an excuse for his behavior. Does it really, though? Which is why you're having people react poorly to you, to how you worded it. I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe those 3 people who reacted poorly to it, and they said exactly why they were reacting poorly to it, because they believed it is ableist to discuss disabilities in a public forum. He goes on to say, the truth as we know it, so far, is that he is just some guy being an asshole. The truth as we know it, well, that's an assumption, my friend. That's not actually the truth, that's an assumption. That may or may not be the truth, but that's an assumption on your part. And then what else? A disability would not cause aggressive behavior to one random woman that hasn't even said a word to him before. This also tells me that you are not very familiar with disabled people, specifically mentally disabled people. Because again, you get a lot of people who do act out in very socially unacceptable ways in public. I'll tell you a few stories. And this isn't even when I worked with people with disabilities directly. This is when I was working as a janitor. I've had a lot of jobs over the years. But I used to work as a janitor at one of the sports buildings at my university. And the university would host certain events for special needs individuals. And every Tuesday, a group of special needs kids would come and they would swim. And every Tuesday, the janitors would have to deal with all kinds of things as a result. There was one kid who was a coprophile. You know what that is? That is an obsession with poop, with human excrement. And specifically, his obsession was handling it, throwing it, flinging it, etc. And so we'd have to clean up poop in the pool, poop smeared all over the bathroom stall, poop flung wherever. That's something that can happen. Some of these kids were very loud and would scream and make big fusses and fits. And yeah, man, there are all kinds of different ways this can manifest itself. And it's often in ways that we tend to think of as ugly and bad and wrong, and we don't want to deal with them. And that's too much. Sweep it under the rug. I don't want it in my life. Boo, hiss, don't remind me of it. If you talk about it, it's ableist. So I'm going to cancel you because I'm too sensitive. And you get the picture. Open your mind and open your heart that these are the children of God. Innocent children of God at that. It is not their fault that they were born with disabilities. It is not their fault. You, on the other hand, if you have the capacity to understand the words coming out of my mouth, you have a different set of priorities and responsibilities to be an integral and whole and perfect human being. And that first starts with recognizing that is another human being just like me, even though they are manifesting their human experience in a radically different way that makes me feel uncomfortable. Get over yourself. Get over it. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.